You're now listening to the Engage the Rockies podcast, your go-to podcast for local and state issues concerning Colorado.
Hello, Colorado. This is the Engage the Rockies podcast. I am your host, Jarvis Caldwell. So over the last, I would say at this point, probably month, we've been talking about these different ballot initiatives that we're going to see on our election ballots for this November. You know, we've talked about like 3 different law enforcement issues that are going to be on the ballot. We talked about that with District Attorney Michael Allen. We've talked with Dan Gates about the hunting, the big cat ban, as well as some other guests that we've spoke to. Today, we have a very special guest, a returning guest. And today we are talking about one that we haven't really focused on, and that is Colorado Proposition KK. And Proposition KK is also known as the excise tax on firearms dealers, manufacturers, and ammunition vendors measure. And it is on the ballot, and it was a legislatively referred state statute. So as all of our educated listeners know, when you see that the letters Proposition KK, you know that it came from the legislature. And instead of being a citizens led, if it was a number like 131 or 127 or something like that. So this did come from our legislature, and we can maybe get into that on who sponsored this bill. But first, I want to get to our guest today, and that is Mr. Ray Elliott. He is the vice president of Colorado State Shooting Association. And as you will recall, we had Mr. Elliott on, I think back in March, might have been in March during the legislative session to talk about some bills that were going through the process. And Proposition KK was actually something that I believe was going through the process at the time. I don't know if it had been passed yet. So just to spin you up, if you haven't heard that, if you didn't hear that one before, the Colorado State Shooting Association is the official state association of the National Rifle Association. CSSA is an independent state organization led and operated by leadership elected by its members. Ray, thank you so much, sir, for joining us again. We really appreciate it.
Jarvis, great to be here again on Engage the Rockies program, and appreciate what you do in informing citizens in Colorado of what's going on and what's happening on the ballot.
Absolutely, sir. Thank you. As something I usually say at the end of our podcast, but I'll just go ahead and say it now. So Engage the Rockies, we're a nonpartisan nonprofit. So we do not take sides. We do not endorse ballot measures or candidates or anything like that. So I'm just going to say that here at the beginning before we jump into this and have you give us your opinion on this. So, sure. Ray, let's start off with the very first thing. Proposition KK, I'd read the title there. Can you kind of describe for our listeners like what Proposition KK, if passed, will actually do? What does it mean to be an excise tax?
You betcha. So if this passes effective January 1, we will begin paying an excise tax in the state of Colorado of 6.5% on all firearms and ammunition. So anything you would buy after that point, assuming this measure were to pass, you will now be paying that 6.5% tax on that.
Yeah. So like So if I go into, I'm just trying to think through this. So when I go into a gun store, I see the price of the gun, right? Say it's $1,000. Like I'm probably still going to have to pay my sales tax, right? Whatever that is, wherever I live at. And then this is just an additional. So it's like it comes out to whatever, and then there's an additional 6.5% on top of that. So that's how it would work, right? Just a basic tax on top of all the other taxes you already pay. It's not replacing anything, I guess, is the point that I'm getting at. Okay, so for a $1,000 gun, which I'm a gun owner, I know you're a gun owner. $1,000 gun 20 years ago, it might have been like, oh man, that's a really high end gun. I don't know if you've been to the gun store lately, but $1,000 gun is kind of it's a decent gun, but it's certainly not on the high end, but it's also not on the low end. So it's very reasonable to spend $1,000 on a gun, especially if you're getting into rifles. So at 6.5%, at what are we looking at? $65.
Yes.
So an extra $65 one day. So you buy it the day before this goes into effect. It's $65 less and just one day difference, and nothing changed. You're still buying the same exact gun or ammo or whatever. I mean, that's at a time Yeah, at a time when everything's more expensive, that's an interesting thing to do. So okay, we I kind of touched on this a little bit, but I was talking about we have other taxes already. Are there any other kind of taxes, whether federal or state, that we're already paying on top of this?
Yes, sir. There is an 11% national excise tax that
Okay.
is paid on firearms and ammunition that is used for conservation and hunter education. So you already have an
Okay.
11% tax being assessed by the federal government on any firearms or ammo purchases. So, one of the issues we've been talking about in Colorado and really across the country is right how unaffordable things are becoming. So
Right.
here we have an 11% tax that is a federal tax, and now we're going to throw on top of that another 6.5%. And then I happen to live in Denver, and Denver right now is looking at a sales tax. There's two issues on the ballot that potential push the sales tax up to 9.65, just under 10%.
Yeah.
Um, right, which is just crazy what we're looking at from a tax load standpoint.
Yeah, and I'm drawing a little bit of blank, but we had on the Common Sense Institute, I think two or three episodes ago, and we were talking about an analysis they did of some of the ballot initiatives, and that, yeah, I think it's a sales tax, and then there's like a healthcare,
Yeah.
UC Health one, and I think those are the two separate ones, but
Yeah,
yeah, but basic, yeah,
Denver Health at 0.34, and
that's
then
right,
affordable housing at 0.5% that'll raise $100 million, and the Denver health tax will raise about $70 million. And then we
right,
wonder why there's affordability problems for those on the lower side of the scale, right? We just keep pushing their costs up and up. You go by
right,
whatever it is, necessities, and that tax will be added onto those if the
right.
sales tax is already.
Yeah,
It's
because
crazy.
that's almost a whole percentage right there alone. And then
Yeah,
now, if this passes Proposition KK, and then you go buy a firearm, not only do you have, if you're buying it in Denver, then not only do you have that 1% extra, then you have the 6.5% extra on top of that. Um, and I just want to touch on a couple things that you had mentioned there. So the you'd you'd mentioned how much money that those Denver things would raise. According to some information I got from Ballotpedia, which I think came from the analysis that the legislature does, but it's estimated that if this passes in 2025, it would raise 30 $39 million in state tax revenue per year. Now, when you were talking about the Denver issues and you're saying it's going to raise $70 or $70 million for this, when I read this and it says it's going to raise $30 million in tax revenue, call me fiscally responsible or fiscally conscious. But when I see that tax revenue, it's going to raise $39 million, I go, that's $39 million that is being taken from the citizens, from consumers, from people purchasing things. That's $39 million they wouldn't have spent the day before this law went into effect. So that's always something interesting to take away. The government kind of brags and says, look, this is going to raise $39 million. And you have to ask yourself, but where's that money coming from? Right? Uh,
That's coming from the citizens, and money that they would have spent investing in businesses in the economy
mhm,
is now
right.
gone and going to the government for the government to do whatever it pleases. And in this case, Travis, I don't
Yeah.
know if we'll go there. What we're
No,
doing is
we're going there. Yeah, we're
all
going
right,
there right now because
all
you
right,
had mentioned
good.
that the federal excise tax went towards
Absolutely.
conservation,
Yep.
and so that was going to be my segue into this. So please go ahead and take it away. Explain to the listeners what this money is actually being allocated for.
So this money is being allocated for victims assistance programs and behavioral and mental health programs. And the
Mhm.
issue with that is, so we're basically making it look like law abiding or responsible gun owners are responsible for what criminals do. Right?
Mhm.
It's almost criminalizing the ownership of firearms and ammunition and suggesting that gun owners are evil people. And nothing could be
Right.
further from the truth, right? We're
Yeah.
taxing them, and then we're saying, hey, we're going to put this to victims programs. We're going to put this to mental health and behavioral programs as if gun owners firearms owners are the ones that are causing those issues. And again, completely false, completely false.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of some other scenario where it's like you're making the law-abiding people, the people going through the proper process, you're making them pay for the criminal element of it, right? And I literally I cannot think. I don't know if you have a good analogy for it, but I'm thinking through, and I'm like, okay, when you purchase a car, they don't say, hey, we're adding a 6% tax on it because people somewhere else steal cars or something. I can't really make sense of it. You go in, you legally purchase a firearm or ammo. You're being responsible. You're doing it the legal way, and the government is saying, "Great, we're going to take 6.5% from you to then give it to victims of firearms or other things." And it's just like I I don't know. I don't know what else to compare it to. If you have anything to add to it, please.
No, I don't. And I look at it and say, you're taxing literally a constitutional right
Right,
guaranteed by the Second Amendment. And you're
right.
throwing a tax onto that in the state of Colorado, earmarking that group. Even as this discussion happened at the State House, it was interesting.
Mhm.
Folks that were on the other side of the aisle really were struggling. We're struggling with the concept that, hey, we need to raise funds for victims assistance and behavioral health, and we're targeting a specific group of people rather than doing this kind of as a state sales tax in addition to the state sales tax. You
Right,
had people questioning that just doesn't feel right. That doesn't seem
right,
right. At the end, they may have voted for it, but you could tell this was an absolute struggle, and I think rightfully so, because you
right.
literally are targeting a group of people that are law-abiding, responsible folks, and now making it look like they are responsible for victims of crimes and mental health issues, which there's just no correlation, none
Right.
whatsoever.
Right. Yeah. And it's at what point do you tax something so much that then all of a sudden now you're going to start creating a black market for it, right? I think we've
That's
seen
it.
that in the marijuana on the marijuana side, which is like, every single 2 years, it seems like, or maybe every year, I feel like I have a ballot question asking me to raise taxes on nicotine or marijuana or something. And you're just like, guys, like I think you're gonna you're gonna create a black market. And according to the marijuana industry, the demand is going down, if I understand
Yep.
correctly, and it's because there's a black market coming in because it's made it so expensive.
No, you're spot on. And, as you look at this, like you said, you keep driving the costs up, keep driving the costs up. The folks this will affect the most is those that probably need it the most, right? That don't
Right,
have the ability, that they're struggling, and yet they may be in a domestic violence situation and they want to go get a firearm for personal protection or ammunition, and they
right,
can barely make ends meet. And now that safety that many others would have that can afford it, they cannot afford anymore. And
right.
so their spouse that may have done things now, instead of them being able to purchase that firearm to protect themselves, they don't have that ability. So it's
Yeah,
kind of interesting to me that government here is saying, hey, we have an affordability crisis, and yet you're making things that really can protect and help people with personal safety at a time, right, when there's not enough police to respond. You
right.
dial 911 and you can be on hold for minutes to get through on a really critical situation. How are you going to have the ability, if you're in that lower class, to be able
Right.
to protect yourself? You're not. You're not going to be able to afford it, which is really, really sad. I'm
Absolutely.
advising folks, just
Hmm.
because we don't have, obviously our organization is working to see this killed on the
Uh-huh.
November ballot, but what if it passes? After you find out, I would say, if you're considering, and if it were to pass, you're
Mm.
considering firearms or ammunition, it is time to load up in the state of
Yeah.
Colorado
Right.
and save yourself that 6.5%. Like you said, $65 on $1,000 gun purchase, and then ammunition, same thing. It is time to get
Right.
out there and buy if this thing happens to pass in November.
I mean, isn't that the irony of it every single time is that whenever they're advocating to ban something or increase the price or something, it just drives it, I mean, it makes it go through the roof, the sales. And so it's like, every time they try to ban, so-called assault rifles, semi-automatic
Yes.
rifles. Every time they try to ban those, like you walk into a gun store, you can't even find them because they all sell out, and then the measure fails, and then the shelves get restocked eventually, and then it's like, man, you guys through your actions and rhetoric, you just put more out there into civilization than was out there before that, and so it's just kind of it's ironic, right?
Absolutely.
That
Absolutely.
these efforts create more of the thing they're trying to get rid of. I wanted to mention something. I highlighted here in my notes. So we just had on, as I mentioned in the beginning, Dan Gates in our last episode to talk about this hunting ban, and I found it interesting that the only other state in the entire union that banned the hunting of mountain lions or bobcats or lynx or anything was California. Okay, now it's funny that we're talking about this because through my research, what I found was the only other state
Okay.
to implement a state excise tax is California. So I believe I've said this on the podcast before. Actually, I think I said it on the Dan Gates podcast, but we had a saying when I worked at the legislature as a staff member, which was just watch what Colorado's doing, or excuse me, watch what California is doing. Give it about 2 years, and Colorado's going to do the same thing. And it's just, I don't know if it's a coincidence or ironic that these last two conversations that we've had, California was they did this before us, and then we followed suit. So I don't know if the activists who are pushing this stuff in California, once they're successful, they just hop a flight and come over to Colorado and then start doing it here. But that's where we're at right now.
Yeah, kind of sad to see what's happening to this incredible state, right? That we are becoming so much like California. Right, we're a Western state. We're much different, and yet in so many ways we have become just like California. In fact,
Yeah,
I think there's a term, isn't it, called Californication or something
yeah,
like
that's
that,
right.
right?
Yeah, I've
Yeah,
heard it before. Yeah,
this is my adopted state, Jarvis, and
right.
just really, really sad to see what has happened since I've been here. I came in 1986, and really a pretty straightforward state that you could come to, but just over the last 6 years, I would say the direction we've headed is the infringement upon our freedoms in so many areas is just really sad to see happening.
Now, last question for you, Mr. Ray. What's your opinion on what we're going to see in the legislature next year? So we had you on during session this year, earlier in 2024, and we talked about bills that were going through the process. We've had primaries already, and there's some very interesting turnouts for some of those primaries with some of the people who are running those bills. So I kind of wanted to get your take on what you see happening with the Second Amendment next session.
Yeah, so I would say, based on what we saw in the primary, some of
Mhm.
the people that are really the far leftist, I would put Elizabeth Epps in there, and several others. They lost their primaries. The state of
Mhm.
Colorado decided that, hey, we are not that far left. And so they lost in the primary. Certainly there was money put behind it. My hope is that we will not see the attack on the Second Amendment like we did in this last legislative session.
Mhm.
Um, because some of those people have been taken out. That's not to say that there still are not. My representative, Javier Mabry, still in that leftist camp. And it looks like he will probably win his election. So there's
Mhm.
still a number of them in there, and I'm sure they will still continue to be vocal, although I don't believe that is his driving passion
Right.
in the legislature. I would like to hear, Jarvis, your thoughts on it as well.
Yeah. I
Given, yeah.
okay, so I think you're correct, right? So you have Elizabeth Epps. She lost in her primary. Elizabeth Epps was the one who ran the so-called assault weapons ban in 2023. I think she was the one that ran in 24. It was either her or Tim Hernandez that were the main
Yeah,
sponsor.
both
Either
out.
way, yeah, either way, they both lost their primary. So that was two very big gun control advocates that are out now. Like you said, you still have people like Mabry, but that's not his bread and butter. We have Stephanie Vigil down here who very well, if she were to win her race, she may pick up the reins for that. I do think that however the elections turn out come this November is really going to dictate what we see next year, right? If we see Republicans flipping seats and winning back seats maybe they lost before, and that the supermajority go away in the House, and then getting closer to being more even, right? The closer Republicans, I would say, get to 30 in the House, then I think that would be a signal maybe to the other side, the Democrats, who in this case are the ones running these bills. I think they look at that and they kind of take a hint and say, oh man, we've went really hard at the Second Amendment over the last like 2, 3, 4 sessions, and now we're starting to lose, and people, it's starting to swing back the other way. So maybe that's a sign that we should maybe back off of this and work and focus more on the kitchen table stuff. So it's really what it gets down to, long story short, is how does this election turn out in November, and what that signals. Now, if Republicans do horrible, then there's the flip side to it, and they're going to say, hey, everything we're doing, voters like, and maybe they're right about that, the majority, and then maybe they start going even harder if Republicans actually lose this session or this election.
Jarvis, one of the things I appreciate about you is the positive attitude that you have. I had not even thought of it, that we could literally stop if the Republicans can take over some of the seats in the House, that we could stop the supermajority, which really gives me hope that right, we may not have the majority in the House, but moving that dial back a little bit really gives me hope that, hey, we might be able to stop the supermajority, and to your point, might bring us more to the center rather than this crazy drive we're going to the left, which is absolutely fantastic. And just, I want to encourage people, get out and vote your values, make sure you know the candidates you're voting for, what they stand for, what direction. Go to their website. I mean, you can find out within a minute or two and get a very good picture of who that candidate is. One of the things I did with my representative, Javier Mabry, was I went and looked at his website, and I saw he was endorsed by the Democrat Socialists of America. There's another term for that. I think it's called Marxism, maybe communism. You have a pretty good idea. And that literally took me less than 2 minutes to see that and to realize, whoa, this guy is very far to the left. Oftentimes, we just listen to what other people say, but we don't do our own homework. You don't have to do a ton of homework, and you can find out a lot just by going to that website. So
yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah, I always tell people when they vote, I go, look, take the time to look up if it's a candidate or it's an issue, a ballot issue. Take the time, look it up. I mean, that's why we get out there and we put these ballot initiatives out there, so maybe people can learn a little bit about it. And then I always tell people, you know what, if there's 2 candidates there and you don't know either of them, and maybe you're not tied to a party or anything like that, just leave it blank. They're not going to send it back to you and say, hey, you forgot to fill this out on this race. You can just skip a race. I mean, that's a common thing with judges. We vote on judges here to retain them. And I can tell you right now that 99% of people probably are not very familiar with, definitely not familiar with all of the judges, right? And so it's like, you could just vote no, or you could vote yes, but if you're just going through and voting no on all of them, well, maybe you're voting to not retain really good judges. So if you're uninformed on it, just leave it blank, skip it, or take the time and do the research. So we'll see where this comes out. By the time this episode comes out, we're going to get very close to actual election day, and then we may have you back on sometime soon here and do a follow-up. I want to leave off, Ray, with you had mentioned you go to their websites to look up about them. I want to make sure I get this out there that if you want to find out more about Colorado State Shooting Association, you can go to www.cssa.org, and you can find out more about the State Shooting Association here. And they've got a lot of great information about the issues and events and things of that nature. So, Ray, thank you so much for your time, sir. I know when I requested you come on, I asked you for like no more than 10 minutes, and now we're at 25. So I really appreciate you being flexible with us. These are obviously very important issues.
Absolutely. Thanks, Jarvis.
All right. Thanks so much.
Thank you for listening to the Engage the Rockies podcast, your go-to podcast for local and state issues concerning Colorado.